Boa tarde a todos.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We will now begin our roundtable on production and release of data in the audiovisual industry. My name is Vitor. I'm the coordinator of Spcine, organizer of this event, and I would like to call to the stage Luis, our director of advertisements, for the first speech. Hello everyone, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here organizing this meeting. My name is Luis Toledo. As Vitor mentioned, it's important to say that today's event is born from the work of the Observatory of Spcine, a work that is focused on obtaining information, and the great challenge of the observatory is to get to know the audiovisual industry of the city of São Paulo and obviously from other regions of Brazil, and to look at the public policies executed by Spcine, and with this, help us to establish our public policies. It's important to say, as has been mentioned earlier this morning, there is a great challenge for fostering the audiovisual industry, and the meeting today is a union of efforts. We have several government entities, we have the public at large, several associations and unions, several representatives of production companies, screenwriters, and other professionals. We also have the academia that represents knowledge for the industry that goes to the heart of what audiovisual needs, which is training, professional training. So this encounter today is special, meaning that we are together in the direction for the development of the industry. We are very pleased today. For those of you that weren't here this morning, the mayor signed a decree that facilitates the filming of productions in São Paulo. It makes it possible to use several areas of the city that were of difficult access, and also released our Cashback 2022, which is a joint effort from the City Hall and the government of the state of São Paulo. So we would like to celebrate with all of you these gains that will be in favor of the audiovisual industry. Also, as a mission of this forum, we would like to highlight that we will have a summary, a letter of intent of all the discussions held in this forum, so as to share with the industry at a national level the main difficulties that we have in our industry. Also, the society and Spcine works together with the public and represented by unions and representatives of the industry to foster our public policies. So I would like to greet you all and say that it is a pleasure to be here with you, and I hope that we can have good discussions. We have one important discussion, how we collect and release data for the transformation of the audiovisual industry, to make it stronger from this data and from the general oversight of the industry. We are very happy to receive you all here today. Thank you, Luis. I'll now call Liara, our Innovation Director and Policies for Audiovisual Industry. Welcome everyone. Good afternoon to everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. It's a moment of celebration from Spcine, from this first cycle of realizations that we have achieved, and this event has been thought very thoroughly, very dynamically, to build a space for conversation, for exchanges, and the efforts that we have been making to attract the industry itself and communicate Spcine to the industry and also to the public at large, and also to the governmental entities, because we understand it is extremely important to do that, and part of it is to have the systematization of data for us to be able to understand the power that the audiovisual industry has, what we produce, what we have in terms of creativity and economically. So to be able to demonstrate this to the society and demonstrate this to the public entities is something extremely necessary, especially for the times that we are going through. So I thank you all for being here today. For those of you that are online, we are transmitting through YouTube. It is a great effort for this conversation be open and accessible to all. So please feel free to participate, to ask questions to the roundtables, to our guests. We will be here this afternoon, tomorrow, and after tomorrow, discussing themes that are important for Spcine and for the audiovisual industry. I have been invited to take over this seat, so for me it is a particular challenge. I'm very happy with the results that we are achieving and demonstrating, but I understand that this is only a part. We have a long way to go. Spcine is a very new company. The audiovisual industry exists for a long time, but is going through a restructuring, a reformulation to understand itself and understand what audiovisual means today. It is movies, open TV, closed TV, TikTok, expanded realities, the gaming as well. So understand that our industry is plural, is potent, and that generates the imagination of the Brazilian culture. Today, speaking about audiovisual production is speaking about how the Brazilian imaginary works, how we do this for Brazil and for abroad as well. And this happens in different ways. It happens in different platforms with different technologies, and this is the way that we think about the audiovisual industry, and this is how Spcine is placing itself as a speaker for the audiovisual industry, trying to communicate to all these partners and agents, all these players, producers, etc. So I do hope that we have 2.5 days of lot of work and lot of conversation, and we want to leave here with some good takeaways, and the mediators of each roundtable will make this explanation to pick up the takeaways that we will put in a document. Not that it is an official document that will establish everything, but it will give us a path, a roadway, how we can increase communication and to foster different areas and strategic sectors that are essential for the audiovisual industry. So I invite you all to follow our program. For those who are not present today, can watch from your homes You can attend if you wish, but the program is being broadcast on YouTube, and we are using all possible tools of communication. And I welcome you all today, and I hope we have a lot of exchange amongst ourselves. Thank you very much. Well, as a part of our event, we offer some institution of the third sector that has projects in the audiovisual industry to present their projects and what the industry can establish with this. I call Jader Rosa, and he will speak to us briefly. Jader Rosa from the Itaú Cultural Observatory. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jader. I'm from the Itaú Cultural Observatory. I'm a black man. I'm using black clothes, and I have short hair, using glasses, and I also have a beard. We are a non-for-profit organization. We act strongly presentially and also in the internet. Today we have an exposition from Tamira Maracá, which is an exposition that we call Occupation. And next week we are going to open the exposition of Arthur Bispo Rosário. We also have an encyclopedia of art and culture from Brazil with this in the observatory. I'm going to talk more about the sectors, the specific sectors. We have a school, which is Itaú Cultural School, which is open and free for training, mediated. And we also have partnerships with universities, with three universities. One is a partnership with Observatory, with Rio Grande do Sul University. We also have a partnership with Helena for cultural mediation, and another for mediation of compared arts. We have also the Project Humus for the culture. And we also act in the digital realm for virtual presentations. So I invite you all to access these channels, and thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Jader. Jader is part of our roundtable representing the Itaú Cultural Observatory. I call Alessandra Meleiro, which will be our mediator. Leonardo Atias, representing the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, and Gilberto Vieira, representing Data Lab. Before we begin, I would like to inform the audience and those of you on the YouTube, we have this QR code if you would like to ask questions, and we have the link in the YouTube. And now I pass the floor to Alessandra. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, we're going to begin the panel collection and dissemination of data in the audiovisual industry. Hello, my name is Gilberto. I am I'm using a yellow shirt. I have beer. And I'm one of the founders of Data Lab, which is an organization that is in Rio de Janeiro. And we have a laboratory that works with generating data. Today we are composed of 20 people from several slums in Rio de Janeiro, working to diversify the narratives about the people that live in this kind of situation. Good afternoon, my Leonardo Atias. I don't have a beard. I have a blue t-shirt. I'm working since 2010. I'm a researcher from the institution. Before me, we had Christina Lees, who retired. So now I'm ahead of the project Cultura of IBGE and cultural indicators, and it's important to have this nucleus or this core of social indicators of IBGE. Thank you, Leonardo. You presented the institution. Could you talk a little bit more about it? My name is Jader. I have been working at Alimento Cultural. I now working with innovation, and for a year and 3 months I'm in the observatory. We're looking at a macro and an overview of this data. And we have a strategic project, which is Tau Play, which is a streaming platform that we have. It's totally free and available to everyone's access. I was introducing myself. I have the most white hair of everyone. I have a white shirt and black trousers. Let me just contextualize. I think we have representatives here from private institution and from the third sector, and a representative of a federal entity, and how to be able to have historic series in a way that we have a structured analysis. So we know that in Brazil we suffer from several hurdles in terms of indicators. If we think about Latin America, we have some initiatives from the government entities. And if we think about Argentina and Chile that tried to incorporate methodologies from state institutions from Europe to create observatories. We're talking about observatories for the audiovisual industry, also for culture and the guests. But our focus here is to think how to make a screenshot of the current situation. This generation of digitators many times are very this is a study that is ongoing from Spcine, from the audiovisual industry in Brazil, and that few are the representative entities that are looking at their own basis of training. So we know that there is a richness of analysis to mediate their own, and also it's the planning, but is not able to have its institution for research, but we end up getting nowhere with this data. So I think this mapping is going to be released in 2022 and will bring some of the experiences of entities that had the support of other institutions as well. So I would like to begin perhaps with Leonardo, talking about what are the challenges of IBGE does in terms of programs, ongoing programs for production and release related to the cultural area, and what are the main challenges that you have been facing in the last few years?
Thank you for your question. We have at IBGE a production of data of different types. We have IBGE, which is official data for statistics in Brazil. In some countries, the system is centralized. In IBGE, we do the census, we do research regarding companies, price index, and other areas. And how did we come about to exist? And back then, we had a request from the Ministry of Culture to see and to assess the culture as a whole, what was going on in the culture, how much of the culture. We call it a satellite account. In other words, how much the country produces. In other words, to assess how much is produced by culture, which is not easy to assess. Of course, you have different kinds of data that you have sometimes overlap. The satellite accounts produced by IBGE in terms of help, we need a lot of a partnership in order to have them out. It is an area, the culture, which has many people coming in and out, especially in the federal level. We used to have meetings with federal entities with one group of people that would change the next meeting. As a result, we had 4 different publications which bring all IBGE's sources that we believe are relevant for culture. So we have an overview of culture within the research by companies. We had in the past domicile research. We would go from home to home. We also have research that deals with the income of families, which is important because it's also part of culture. So we had all work related to the satellite account. As it happens with other countries, statistics is really important. France is a good example. We have always worked in order to have precise data. We had an edition that was published in 2013, and we had a delay for the research on homes or households. And because of lack of investment, the good research could not be carried out. With the exception of Mexico, all of Latin America does not have investments in statistics. In Mexico, they were luckier. They had some government investment, which helped producing good data. They have a kind of protected budget to carry out the work. We see that the production of data coming from Mexico is very good, especially in the past years. For audiovisual industry, you have some information that can be looked at according to the research produced by IBGE. I would like to show you 3 web links that I believe are important as source of data. When we talk about source of data, I'm going to quote my friend Federico Barbosa. Statistics is divided into layers of data. Sometimes we cannot get down to the detail. So we have all these layers of data which are important for decision making, for the public and private decision making. But of course, you need to have other data, detailed data. If you're working on a specific region, you need to have a specific information. The categories of statistical agencies do not evolve as fast. In terms of creation, specifically in the beginning of the chain, it's difficult to be collected. The new types of arrangements, the new kinds of companies that are intertwined in different sectors. Streaming, for example, is an international kind of mode, which is also intertwined with different categories. This is an important source that we have, which are companies. I'm going to give you this web link that will give you more information. Of course, it takes time to be produced, around 2 years to be compiled. They are data from highs. We have Nike 4 digits. I believe you all have that, especially for cinema and movie production data. You have detailed data by municipalities and also including confidentiality. If you use this link, you're going to see an X. And this X means that in a certain municipality you have less than 3 companies. If you have 1 company, you know that confidentiality may be broken. If it's 2, you know what the other, your competitor is making or charging. And there's also what we call the municipal and state basic information. We go to different municipalities in the country and ask about different policies regarding cultural actions and also space for cultural activities. It's important for you that deal with culture to know what's going on around the country. Sometimes one municipality has a policy specific for their region, and others will not have the same kind of data. So one can have a cultural policy, and the other one may not have it. So these are some examples of the detailed information that we can produce. We can go into the nitty-gritty, the details, by doing a more deepened assessment. Sometimes it's not so easy to navigate in IBGE site or website. But I believe that it is an important research tool. Itaú also compiles data through its observatory. And at IBGE, you can also do other assessments and research. We try to compile this data every 2 years. In the system of cultural events, we have tables which include different regions for researchers to carry out their analysis. We have publications from 12 to 14 pages, which are a good tool to disseminate cultural information. In the beginning of the pandemic, we had some data published in 2019. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I set about my work to interview different people from the cultural area. I was able to talk only to 18 people, and people were very happy to talk to me either over by phone or by WhatsApp. By doing this, we were able to get more information, but you know how hard it is to get this information. We see that some people try to get to this level of information that we want to. We have some statistics coming from observatories and different methods. There are some questions regarding to this quest. There is one chapter which relates to this area. In other words, there is a need to try to work these pieces of data. Perhaps we do not have enough research in the cultural area. One of the topics that I work of is governance and also racial inequalities. As to governance, that is a difficult field to work with. Culture, of course, has to face difficulties because of changing of people coming in and out. We're, of course, going to hear people say no because the budget is reduced and time is short. And when we have partnerships, we have money coming from health ministry, then we are able to carry out research. Otherwise, it's difficult. In the case of data, we have a regular production which are relevant to understand labor and companies in the cultural industry. We have CNAE 59. We can see at IBGE data some important and relevant information for the cultural industry. It's a shame my colleague from SIDRA could not attend this meeting today. But in summary, we have some data available, which is important to everyone interested in this area. If you have any questions, please come to me. I'll be more than pleased to help you. Well, by the end of our debate here, you can send your questions via WhatsApp or using the tool of the YouTube. After looking or having an overview of the possibilities, we can now delve into these territories and see what happens specifically. Well, I can tell you it's a challenge to talk or to be with our colleagues from IBGE. We have this very good relationship, but of course, it is difficult to access the data that they provide. We know that they have a very difficult structure, which entails data about Brazil and data about ourselves. It is something challenging, but at the same time, we're grateful to have a forum like this to exchange ideas. I am representing civil society, which I believe this is a very important area. We have to fight for this room to have debates about civil society. I'm going to give you an overview of our story, how we deal with data, and this will help us to understand how we can help each other being different sectors in order to get to better results, not only for the culture, for audiovisual, but for Brazil as a whole. Data Lab emerged as an idea in 2015. I was at that time studying cultural practices in 6 different favelas. We carried out 500 different interviews with young people from favelas. One of the things we discovered is that official data did not show production or events regarding cultural activities in Rio. I don't know if the data is now updated. I believe we do have some better information, but at that time we did not have. By going around the territory, we got to know that there were hundreds of spaces dedicated to cultural production in the favelas. We knew that people there were living and were acting in cultural fields. When we changed that into graphs and into data, we were able to see the structure that they had, which was not able to do at the time. We realized that there were many data that were lacking. At the same time, we knew that they were lacking stories that could make this story concrete. We know that every hour a black person dies in Brazil. Why is this not shown? Are the stories told in the correct ways? Why are we not touched by those stories? And this is when the contact with the concept came about, which was generation of data about ourselves. Are people open enough to be able to learn and produce data about ourselves? We decided to build a model from the gaps we identified. One of them relating basic sanitations. Marea Favela has 140,000 inhabitants, 60,000 households. And there was a curious fact. 100% of this population, did they have access to selective collection? We knew that this was not true. What happened to that research that showed that all of them had access? But where was the mishap? What happened to that population, which was large, that had such subreal or unreal data? We decided to generate data about this micro area that would help managers, institutions, and companies to have better indicators and thus produce policies. I'm talking about Marea Favela, but also this also includes other favelas. I'm talking here about basic sanitation. Of course, we can talk about different indicators which are not part of the big research works that we see. As time went by, we went on different partnerships with universities. We now understand who are producing methodologies regarding data production within universities. So we went after LGBTI people and black women who are working at schools, many times by themselves, statistics, math, or economics schools. And we knew that there was something before they came to those universities. They did not have perceptions about race and gender, sexuality and gender, sexuality and race, territory. And by doing this, we were able to generate our reports and our stories. We understood that those who were producing data about the territory were people who lived in that area. We talked to a woman because we wanted to understand who were the women who died at pre-birth and birth and after giving birth. That lady was a young and black woman. We know that the black women who were young are the ones who die most in Brazil. And she was able to understand the profile of these women. She was one of them, together with a lot of other women. This made a difference in the analysis we carried out. Today, we have experimental methodologies to generate data. One of them is COSAP. We use a WhatsApp number so that people in the favelas can denounce human rights violations in the Maré favelas. We have been producing stories about lack of basic sanitation in the favela. We have been producing indicators based in our territories. And this has been a problem, quote unquote, for people who produce data, basic sanitation companies, and everybody in the area. People and companies that deal with the water and sanitation also were impacted by research. I know I'm here to talk about data around audiovisual. We have not produced anything regarding audiovisual in Rio de Janeiro or Brazil, but I believe it's important to tell you this story. Us as civil society, as government, be able to look at or dialogue with those areas, because we are a lot of people. 20% of Rio's population live in the favelas. We know how the research is done. We know that this work has opened eyes of people in order to have them know what to do. And this has sparked this interest in these young people for them to work about data. This is a kind of a black box that we cannot access. It's difficult to access, analyze, and cross data, but it is possible. They have done this up to now, and we can do it too. This is a learning that we can share with different sectors, including audiovisual. We have to understand what the young are producing. We know they're producing a lot of audiovisual material. And of course, we'll see that some people like to assess, understand what's going on, and perhaps propose most effective solutions to the industry based on their own experience. It's not private, it's collective. And we know that this collective of people have been silenced for a long time. So perhaps it's the time to work together. This is my message, and let's go on with other colleagues.
Wonderful. I think this was the idea. To bring this experience in a diagnosis through the official data. I think this is going to be necessary. And for this, we have to bring the entities that want to have an analysis and diagnostics on their data. This is institutionalized and very far. Now, last to pass on to Jader to talk about his experience in Itaú Cultural when the observatory was created and the data that you collected. Talk about this genesis. The observatory is 16 years old, and when it was made, it was supposed to be a management and information center. That's why we had a cultural policies and also the production of knowledge. We have several publications that we have and distribute them freely. And we have a branch that is a CAPTA with EAD with University of São Paulo, which is turned to science and technology. And currently they're finalizing the letter of company, and we will release it and the next one will happen with Evaristo. And this generates research. So Ariane Fonte Silva was the head, and she had to work in the community around the University of São Paulo. So this ended up fostering and giving incentives to articulate this network of researchers and opinion makers. In 2019, we had a new initiatives, which is a data panel that has as a purpose to structure the indicators of the creative economy. We have 3 axes is for work or labor, the other is international trade, and other are goods. We use the basis of IBGE, 10.5 million data that we process. And I think my mantra today, this report has a panorama, and we have to give instruments to the industry, as Byung-Chul Han says, of the excess of information. So how do we ask good questions for the volume of information that we have? When we take the data from PNAD, it's huge. So how can we be assertive and be able to work with specialists to analyze this data? The data panel at every quarter, we had the last report from the fourth quarter, and we saw that during this period compared to 2021, there was an increase in creative economy. But how is this so? This is a fragile sector that we have little support. We know that there is an ascending curve, but when we look at the details, these are sensitive data that must be looked at. We have to pay attention to this. This is one thing that we must analyze in these indicators. Another thing when we're talking about creative economy is informality and formality. So half of the people that are working in this industry and half are working informally. So we have to have an intersection. And if we go to race and gender, the women and the colored people are most affected. When we talk about labor, we look at the creative intensity that was, for example, a screenwriter, the one who is support, which is an accountant, and the one who works in a creative industry, but he's not a creative person. He doesn't do creative work, and a designer that works in automobilistic field. So we looked at all the sectors and done the comparative analysis. But when we get the data, we have to use specialists for specific industries. I know that in Piauí there was an increase in architecture, and in Rio Grande do Sul, in audiovisual industry dropped. So we end up having to do a zoom in these industries. The observatories, besides the data, we have Datafolha to see the habits of the Brazilians, and we did the pre-test this weekend, and we're going to the 3rd edition. And this research began at the beginning of the pandemic, so the cultural industry was the most affected. So we wanted to know the expectations when we were the first to close and the last one to open, and how this would go on. And we had the public spaces that has a mediation, that has a support team, And in the second, and we also brought a data that is food for thought, and it's important to mention it, which is if you're having contact with the arts, did this improve your relationship at home in terms of depression, fighting against yourselves? And if we look at a larger realm in art and culture, we have less people having health issues and having more creators and support. But in last year, we added new layers. So the one layer that we brought was this habit that you acquired in an environment in the midst of the pandemic. Everyone went to the internet. Many companies migrated to the internet. It wasn't the case of Itaú Cultura because we were already there. This has a cost. There's training that is necessary, and how it's not only making alive, we have to have the system working for this to make sense. So this habit that you acquired is still there. Do you still have the intention to have presential or hybrid events? So the hybrid was the one that came about. The habit that you have culturally, what did you do the most? Music and audiovisual, or movies. And the movies were the one that grew more in terms of 25%. So people were more connected with the screens. And then we go to streaming as well. If I'm not mistaken, 7 out of 10 used streaming platforms. And there are also layers that we have to look into detail, not necessarily the person that watches. This is an open research. You can access this research in the observatory site. What goes on and what I watch at home is what I look more. If I have kids, they will have childhood series. So we have mini-series that for streaming, and following were international films and then national films. We asked this because we were using the platform and gave us subsidies, and we asked later, and what about the Brazilian cinema? How do you see it? We saw that it is low, and the people that have a habit to watch Brazilian films or national films are from classes A and B. And the sample of this research, 48% for 2,200 people, 48% are class C. Then we have 27, 26, and so the C class is not consuming this. But if we think about TV, where he consumes this, TV is the first indicator, and the next one are smartphones or cell phones. So we're talking about streaming, we're talking about how we're going to access the screen, but people are watching TV, 47%. And it's expensive to produce for TV. So how can we have a documentary, a film, or live that can have audience and the people there to consume the content that we want to present? The health, mental health remain the same. So this year we can only measure if we have a history. And the proposal of Itaú Cultural is to continue with this, having more fronts of research. And this is also we're going to start a research at the Bienal do Livro. Another research that we had, which was a little bit smaller but also interesting to see the audiovisual figures, was the cultural consumption of Avenida Paulista, which is Sesc, MASP, Japan House, House of Roses, and Instituto Unibanco as well. So we made research of what mobilizes people to watch these, and we see that people program themselves to have a social programming. And then we have focus groups. And these focus groups, we want to know about the youngsters. Who are these people that are consuming this? What are their difficulties? What are their stories? So we used youngsters from with less income, and what mobilizes this people thinking about streaming as consumption. At the time we had Sintonia. This dialogues with me. They connected with this, and Institute Datafolha also helped us. And the evangelicals, there was a pendulum, what they consider relevant or not. But we wanted to see why the evangelicals, these are youngsters that we don't look, but they are producing culture in the churches. They would know how to play instruments, they write, they film content, and we look at this as well. And we perceive that the curatorship and those opinion former, I'm very engaged in church, I'm going to influence people to watch this content, if it's quite violent, because I indicated it can be interesting for this group. I think there are a series of data that we have that we make available to you, and what we want is this feedback. So what are these data bringing to us, and what Itaú Cultural together with IBGE and Data Lab, how can we, I see that this place is just gains. How can we advance? Another bridge that we have here is the Instituto Cultural has a partnership with the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, and we have to have managers that act in the cultural industry and creative industry in a critical way, looking at several industries and extracting data and information. We have to bring this up. And in this perspective, we had other partnerships. Last year was the year of creative economy, and UNESCO has had. So what was the work of the students that can be presented as a portfolio of photography, for example? We are strengthening this individual to bring his research forward to the debate. And besides other fronts that we have several books that can be accessed. And as we know, it is restricted. Only 30 people that can do this. In the first enrollment, we had 600 people enrolled, but we were going up only to 30. And so what we established, and this is a process that has been adopted into the observatory, all the master classes are open, and everyone can watch them in YouTube. All the content is available as well. And this year, we were glad to make this feasible. We are now in the second class, and we were able to have 50% of the spaces to go through affirmative action. So the online format facilitated to democratize the access, not only people from São Paulo, and we are battling to become more online so that other people and other voices can be heard from different territories, from different places, to sensibilize these indicators and data.
It's incredible, this kind of work that you've been carrying out. Observatory does not have the need to have an internal group of people, intelligence central unit as other places. You choose to have partnerships with learning institutions. I believe this is an interesting model that really helps a lot restructuring some of these areas. There was the second phase of the data panel, which has been enhanced beyond quantitative data. And the question was, do you believe that questions such as inclusion, not only inclusion as consumption habits, should be part of indicators? This is another possible way. I believe this would enhance the experience. And this was back then when we look at its strategic plan, the Ministry of Cultural Economy or Creative Economy adopted. We cannot only be a reflex of what European observatories do. We have some specificities that have to be looked at. Environment is one of them. Socioeconomic reality is another one. Diversity is a third one. I believe that Itaú Cultural is open and very sensitive to this specificity. They are adjusted to some specific issues. I'd like now to ask a more general issue, if you will, which has to do with informal working. I'd like to hear the Institute for Geography and Statistics. I'd like to know how you approach informal economy and how Data Lab has been assessing this field. If there's instruments of persuading people in the search for evidence, how do you use that to approach people in terms of methodology? As regards informal economy, our main data source are household interviews, because there you know how many people live in each household, and you know how these people are in terms of work, if they are formal, informal workers, if the company is registered, etc. And the main research is that it is a kind of general research. If you see this area, we notice that we have the municipalities, the capitals. This would not encompass other municipalities. The more cuts you have, the harder it is to have reliable data. If you have data, you need to focus the niche you want. Because this is a sample which is there to look at the job market, you have a kind of a too general of a view. It is the companies are based in highest and registrations with companies that are registered. We did a study with different companies, especially MICE, which are the ones that are small companies. May is not. It is not mandatory for maize to declare highs. These are some of the difficulties we find. This is a kind of research that we do all over Brazil. And in order to give an overview of the economic dynamics, we needed to study other areas. Audiovisual industry is also part of the sample, but there are other cultural sectors that are more difficult to talk about, like heritage being one of them. There is always this problem of companies being registered or informal companies. Some companies change. For example, companies that would rent videos, now they are into another activity. And you have this challenge of getting to know what the company is doing presently. We have data collected from households, and mostly being informal working, informal economy, and a creative cultural sector has many problems in terms of providing good and reliable data. One of the difficulties we have is to act on those areas. We have to use the right methodology to go deep into it, and that's what we try to do. There is a census coming from Maré Favela that says that by 2015, we came to know that there are more than 2,300 entrepreneurs in that area. There were many people who were there to conduct the census. I believe this is the question. How can we identify areas to be assessed? I believe it's difficult to find and identify those areas. When they are identified, we need to know that there is a lack of information, and this is a struggle that we've been going through. How to find organizations that work with data in the favelas when they share different methodologies that are great, if you ask me, that are able to cover all the specific activities. And this has to be done from within. We have never done any research about culture or entrepreneurship. What we do are investigative and journalistic studies and research. We did this research in 2015, but the data are not updated. We know how important it is to know the informality of the sector. People are surviving. We cannot require all companies in a favela to be registered. They are focused to surviving. What we do with this data, that's another question. To foster spaces of research within those areas so that they can guide us, they can show us the way to go. In other words, what can we do so that organizations that are part in the favelas may produce data about their areas in order to be included in our census? I'm talking here about spaces to formulate those cultural activities. Today in Rio, There's another lab called Jaca. I believe you heard about it, which is in the Jacarezinho favela. It came about by using a methodology that we already had. We helped them using this methodology so that they could go on with the work. And this is part of us. We have to see this important part of this society, which are people who live in the favelas. Well, eventually, if this movement of the civil society that produces grows, this may come to what Leonardo just mentioned, which is the informality of all this, because this is part of the Brazilian GDP, but this is not taken into account. Leonardo put that to us. Civil society is co-responsible to generate demand so that IBGE be able to assess what is not assessed today via ministry. So civil society can demand this via advocacy. I believe this is what he said, and this was really important. Questions? Do you have any comments or questions? No questions from the audience? While we wait for the audience to ask questions, Jader, can you talk specifically about audiovisual? Do you focus on this area? Well, we do not have any research in this area. We're going to have the third edition of that lab. If there is any new data, I'm talking here about creative culture. If there is something new, we're going to release it. But until now, we do not have any data. No, everybody here works with research data, and I believe it is difficult to present data, and not all have graphs, indicators, and tables to show the results. I believe we have to change the way to present the information. We need to have a narrative, if you will. We need to have everybody co-responsible for information, from technician to the researcher. Maybe a transforming agent of society if I'm co-responsible. By doing this, I can talk to different types of publics. I can talk to a private company as well as to young people in the favela without using those big tables or big graphs. What we want is to challenge you to produce data, but of course, we are going to be the translator of the information collected. I also teach at the National School of Public Administration. This is a federal entity which provides training for people who work for government. As we see, it's very important to understand the data that is produced. It's difficult because people do not have basic knowledge. I see here two ways to go. One of them is to be trained with the basics. Some of these agents do not know how to analyze a single graph. People are not trained in terms of graphs and numbers. They do not know and do not care about these kind of data. Sometimes they do not understand how to use, how to visualize, and to provide data. This is an important work we have to do for the entities who want to boost the audiovisual industry. And there are other ways. When you mention universities, for example, I believe we need to have more work towards scholarships and awards. At Data Lab, you were able to bring people in, especially people from quantitative area, to allow this to go on. From quantitative to qualitative is easier than the opposite. We need to have people that are able to use these layers of data and also produce this data. I believe today we live in a world of questionnaires. People basically do not know how to ask questions. The questions are badly asked. And literature is poor in terms of data collection is also poor. We have good books in English about data collection, and there are studies that say how to show data that people accept and understand what it is all about. So it is important to think about all this in the introductions and in training, both Spcine and other entities to think this way. I have a challenge to all of you. We live in a surveillance regime or system. What I mean by that is that big corporations oppress us in terms of suppressing our rights, specifically the big amount of data that concentrate data of algorithmic racism. We are here in a bubble of data that are good for everyone, but we have to know that there is evil forces that are operating on our bodies right now. And we see this when we use subways or any kind of transportation system. We need to have the data come to people in the good way. And I just wanted to tell you that this is a major challenge. Well, we have now a question to Dr. Labito. Based on the experience of your institutions, I'd like to know how relevant it is for the public to relate to professionals of the industry that show diversity of gender and race. Can this impact the cultural consumption as a whole? Well, thank you for the question. When we talk about informality, the contracts that we had signed with artists have not been canceled. The resources have been given. We began with micro terms to leverage those artists in terms of race and gender. We have a curatorship that is focused on Black producers and artists, and also women directors. This is one of our goals. We have not reached what we wanted, but that's the way we want to go. There are some plays like Gota d'Agua Preta and others that discuss these topics. We have a project which is open, which is called ancestralities.org.br, which entails the culture of Black lives. And this is an area that proposed to be a hub of information, something that did not exist before. We have a board that aims at giving visibility to these groups. We have this platform to boost the visibility of these groups. We have Bongola also, which is the meeting of people that debate racial issues. We are now going to open a bid for this platform to foster research and researchers that want to do their work to know who are producing this kind of content. We want to have everybody working together, consultants, researchers, and everyone. Well, that's fantastic.
We are a base organization made by black people and LGBTQ women. We are a mixed group, and what we are doing has the dimension of our language. What we're talking, how we are able to produce a language that can access people. We are at the Maré, narrating what happens to those people all the time. So this is part of the schedule at every time, and there are the daily choices that they have, so that we have more diversity in the production and of the visualization of data. And this is how the colored journalists write and how they produce art, and how we analyze the databases. We understood this as time went by, and I know it's quantitative, it's technical, but we understood how different it was that for people that were asking questions about themselves and looking at the database did innovative things. So the representativity of those who produces data and that builds the narratives based on those data. We are doing this constantly on a daily basis. Well, we are out of time. We will have another roundtable. I would like to thank you all and sharing your experiences, your concerns, and that we take this to the laboratory. For the board of Spcine, I would like to thank the presence of the audience and pass the word to Victor from the observatory. Thank you, Alessandra. I would like to thank you all. I would like to thank you all for being here, for participating. I also like to thank our guest speakers. This is the closest we get to the observatory here at Spcine. The data, the takeaways is what we have in terms of what we can look at ourselves to understand the complexities of the society. I thank you all once again for being here, and for those who are going to attend the next session may stay in the room. Thank you, everyone. private sector, I'm going to call Raquel to present the project Paradiso. Hello, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here in person. Thank you, Spcine, for this opportunity to present Paradiso. For those of you who have never heard of Paradiso project, it's good to know that you all are aware of Project Paradiso. I'm going to have a brief presentation. I'm going to summarize to bring the theme for this panel. It's a philanthropy. It was born from the desire of Olga Rabinovich to support the culture of audiovisual, the industry of audiovisual. So she decided to create this project. We have an institute that has two areas, audiovisual and palliative care. Project Paradiso was launched in 2019, March 2019. It seems a long time away, but it's only 3 years old. And before its release, Olga, her associate, Roberta Covo, and the director, Josephine Bourgeois, for a year they have a deep dive with interviews, talks with players of the industry in the Brazilian market and in the international market to make an X-ray of the industry, to understand what kind of support and training and what initiatives would be welcome to contribute to this industry. So this talks began in 2018, 2019. So there was a lag, a time lapse that we had to go through, but we wanted to invest in screenwriting, the conversations. We needed more resources for this. Our first program launch was the incubator Paradiso. We have feature films, screenwriting. We only work with fiction, documentaries, and series. We don't support yet but as of this incubator, we started with other programs. One of the main programs are our grants. We support Brazilian professionals to train abroad. It's important to mention that the international access is transversal. It's a means. There's always an international look to what we have done. We have offered over 100 grants. We have partners all over the world with ACTV. We have grants for Maestria in Cuba, Maestria Productions, and the creative production and distribution, thinking about audience intelligence, the audience, thinking about the audience, that to tie art with and then thinking about the international market from the beginning, the Brazil in the world that supports productions that are exhibited internationally. This was a program in 2019. We supported Bacurau that went to Cannes. In 2020, this program began to grow significantly, and it would be very good to say that it was for a good reason. Many productions were selected for the Berlin Festival, but other support programs for Ancine, with all the initiatives of audiovisual from the international relations and with Brazilian content, Cinema Brasil, began to weaken. They lost support, and in a median from the in Paradiso, Project Paradiso, we saw that we didn't have the resources, but it was important to do something so that these windows or doors that had been opened to us wouldn't completely be closed. So with this, Brazil in the world focus in internationalization grew. In 2021, we had R$1 million. We offer for
productions in great festivals, values up to $10,000 that can begin with also with smaller festivals. It's never us that select the productions, and it's always the partner, it's always the event that chooses. So this facilitates for the decision of how to support those who will be receiving the benefits. We are we have a work in progress, which is Festival of Guadalajara in June, San Sebastián, the Cine Latino Toulouse Festival, and Ventana Sur, that happens in December in Buenos Aires. In these events, we offer $10,000 for Brazilian productions. And the producer will use these funds as he wishes. And when we release the idea, they can use for internationalization to participate in the events. And we saw that many producers use this to finalize their productions, their films. So at this, they are selected for these festivals. They still need resources, and we are able to give these resources for them to finish up their productions. It can seem small support, but it has been very important. So I wanted to highlight Brazil in the world, since we're going to look at the international market towards Brazil. And also in 2020, right after the pandemic began, is the Show d'Elefante. Oh, very good. Many people know it. The Show d'Elefante is a platform that seeks to facilitate the Brazilian producers mapping for international funds, how to finance, how to get resources for productions that we want to make here in Brazil. And this mapping, for those who know, Show Me the Fund, I suggest you take a look at it. It not only helps producers but also screenwriters. So there are investments in all of the phases, post-production, or so there is this project has been done in partnership with Brasiliconte. I don't know if everyone knows these organizations. These are entities that have a great work for internationalization and export of Brazilian audiovisual, but they're not receiving anymore the support from the Brazilian agency Apex Brazil. And I talk about these programs with great pride. I have worked in Brazil content, and to see that the Brazilian government is not supporting these programs, which is done all over the world actually, and the continued policy is essential so that the image of the country persists and is seen abroad. Brazil appears abroad that doesn't have resources, and this weakens our prospects. We want security in for our organizations, legal security as well. So it's important that this is done, but also the entrepreneurs that work in this industry, the quality of our pieces. When we want to enter international funds for projects, the training is essential, the competition is high abroad, but we have to step in and not let us lose the space as we have been losing, and so that we may become stronger. I think we can turn this around. So I think this is what I had to say about Paradiso project. I would like to thank you again. For those of you who want to know a little bit more about the project, you can talk to me and my crew by Beatriz, Luisa. We are always present. We are partners of Spcine and a branch of the project. We have offered already 100 grants. These are people that somehow received support to some for courses and training internationally. We can't offer grants for everyone, which we would like to do, but when they return from these trainings and courses, they have to democratize and multiply what they have learned, and this is what we are doing. Last year, together with Spcine, we released this. We are in the second edition of Paradiso with Spcine, and the only advantage in this pandemic would be that we were able to nationalize this program. We attended all the regions of Brazil, so Paradiso is a way for us to reach more and more people with our training and through our grants. Thank you very much. Good roundtable to everyone.
Bom, pessoal, para iniciar nossa mesa.
Well, to begin our panel, we have our QR code here. We are going to receive the questions. My name is Vitor. I'm responsible for the observatory. We are organizing this event to discuss one of the main themes for the recovery of the industry. I'm going to call Steve Solot, our mediator for this panel. Gustavo Melo, representing Boutique Films. Cibele Galvão from Elétrica Locadora. Andressa Papas, representing MPA. And Edson Viana, representing Moonshot. Good panel to everyone. I pass the floor to Steve. Well, thank you very much, Victor. So first of all, I would like to congratulate Spcine for this event, and also to explain that we already received very important news, and I have to congratulate not only due to the decree of the Film Commission, but also the new amount of the cash rebate. And I'm representing the Osborg SPI. Osborg is an entity, is a consultant firm based in London that does technical consulting and studies all over the world. So I would like to mention the kind of studies that we do, which is most important to you, is what has been done through the Inter-American Bank that has the name, goes for the name of Behind the Cameras, which is a huge publication that brings an important research that we have done in Latin America about what is lacking for the technicians below the line. What does this mean? It is a term that I have to explain because it makes sense to discuss this in this panel. These are technicians that work in the production set, and above the line means people, executives, and others that work with talent or executive producer and so on. But this report from IBD is important for all countries of Latin America. The research has been done by Osborg, and another research I want to mention that was done on the behalf of Spcine for the mapping of a kind of auditing for capacity of production and technical labor in São Paulo and in other 5 municipalities. It hasn't been released but it will be available, I believe, this month with the worldwide release in the Cannes Festival. Another thing that we have is the mapping of incentives. I do a tracking of incentives, every kind of incentive, not only cash rebate, but more sophisticated, such as transferable tax credit, which is a credit that only exists in Colombia and the Dominican Republic, and other kinds of incentives in the municipal and state level. And we look at the 4 pillars of a robust audiovisual industry, which are incentives, infrastructure, which means studios, technical labor and training, and also what we called film-friendly environment, where the producer can find in São Paulo through the São Paulo Film Commission. So this is a small presentation of what is Augsburg, and I would like to ask each one of the panel members to present a little bit about each one of yourselves and the entities that you represent and why they are relevant to this panel and to Spcine. Let us begin with Andressa, please. Hello, is this working? Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, my colleagues. I would like to thank Spcine. It's great to be able to be here to discuss with you. Everyone very interested in the recovery of the industry. It's very important to talk about this. My name is Andressa Pascos, Motion Pictures Association here in Brazil. For those Motion Pictures Associations represents globally for cinema, now the streaming platforms, Open TV, cable TV. We have Netflix, Universal, Paramount, Warner Brothers. We we act worldwide, and our role and mission, once again, our role in Brazil is to act together with you, with the community, with the private sector, especially with the public sector, in the sense that we try to disseminate that our audiovisual industry is plural, diverse, and this has to be placed as a strategy, be it in the federal government or local level. I am at your disposal for your questions, and I hope we can contribute for this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andressa. Now, Edson, you have the floor. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Edson Viana. I work at a producer located here in São Paulo. I work in the content strategy and business development. I'm going to say now why I'm here and not Roberto Davila. We've owned this producer company for over 20 years. I am graduated in cinema and television. I wanted to work on television, and at that time broadcasters were not recognized as TV people. An independent market would only hire people in advertisement. And of course, I was not hired by television, so radio hired me. Radio gave me two things. First, the ability to understand that correct information is interesting, something interesting to sell. And I used that information. And second, music industry, where I graduated as a music entrepreneur. I am the one who sees the audiovisual industries from outside. I have not been inside a production company for years. I am involved in production. When the thing about being on the set every single day, to be concerned about production next week or next month, I understand the value of our activity, audiovisual activity, to which I am involved in the music industry and in which I delve when I began working at Rio Filme, when Spcine started its activities here in São Paulo. And Rio Cine is a reference, or has been since then, now with Viviane as its head. And what Spcine is doing, and what Rio de Janeiro did in an exemplary way, is what we need to convey as value the whole time, to have an entity like Spcine to change the audiovisual industry from a big producer to a small one. It must be decisive throughout the life of a project. As somebody who goes to a movie theater and this person has a ticket which is subsidized, this is fundamental, and the communication of value of all activities at all times. This is really what gives value to our industry. The creation of value of what the production company put out. We're going to be talking about specific work, about audiovisual later on, but here I am to understand and try to communicate what we do. When we see in the newspaper an article about the impact of audiovisual industry, that's important, but we need to be headlines every single day. We have to communicate to all levels so that they understand that they are also part of it and they can take part in all our activity. Thank you, Edson. Now, Gustavo. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Spcine, for inviting me to be here with you in this panel. We are very happy to represent boutique films. We have been a strategic partners. I believe that's the correct way to call ourselves. It is important to see what we have been doing here in São Paulo as an industry. And now, coming with this great news, we are happy to have our project awarded. We have to understand the impact that we have made on the productive chain at the time that we live and have lived a problematic or difficult times, especially concerning audiovisual industry, and especially with our international partners. Boutique Films is going to celebrate 10 years. We are all producers in the sense that we develop, create, and establish partnerships with other talents. We close deals with partnering companies, and we also participate in distribution of the films. And this is what we are interested in this chain that involves all these different parties. We want to contribute to this discussion the best we can. Thank you very much, Gustavo and Cibele. Good evening, everyone. I'm representing Elétrica Cinema and Video. He was headed by Pedro Farcas, who is also director of photography. We also lease equipment, which is well known all over Brazil by the quality of our products. We are trying to get ahead especially now due to problems we've been having regarding qualifications and the distance that we see among different producers. I thank Spcine for the opportunity to be able to talk about our experience as a whole, but always taking care of what we say. We want to leave our doors open so that we are able to give support to all these technicians and those who have faced difficult times as to technical quality. And I expect, and I sincerely hope to contribute to a good and fruitful discussion. I am available to any questions you may have. Thank you, Cibele. Now we're going to talk about attracting international productions and investments, which is the topic of this panel. From Osborne, our contribution has been a study that becomes an important tool to steer public policies in order to offer international producers certain necessary factors involving the ability of technical labor as well as infrastructure. Within this process, we have identified gaps and we're able to recommend public policies in order to improve the situation here in São Paulo and show investors as well as producers of international content who are interested in São Paulo that yes, it is worthwhile to invest and produce in the state of São Paulo. I'd like to ask our panel members some specific questions. Basically, what each entity could focus on and appreciate or not like. Things related to São Paulo. Let's begin with Andressa from MPA. Andressa, can you talk a little bit about the members of MPA? How do you see Brazilian market and how does that relate to your international investment agenda here in Brazil? Thank you, Steve. Well, to talk about Brazil and why Brazil is strategic for MPA is kind of obvious. There is no country like Brazil in terms of cultural and social issues. When we look at Brazil, we see a world inside this country, different cultures, different languages, different slangs, different people, different identities. We are used to saying that there's no better place in the world to invest than Brazil. It is a very, very rich environment and one of the greatest markets in the world and the largest one in Latin America. But beyond landscapes and the native cultural identity, we have to go beyond. You were talking about the need for qualification for better technicians. We have to see that Brazilians, not only as consumers and spectators that love to see themselves reflected on screen, the workers, especially the ones below the line, the ones that work behind the red carpet, as we say it in our industry, are people who, just like Brazilians, are willing to do whatever they're required to do. They're very talented and creative. But even so, and here I agree with my colleagues, a program that would qualify and train these technicians of the audiovisual industry. And here, we're not talking about above the line. I'm talking here about the below the line. I'm talking here about audiovisual workers that would not exist without them. Beyond the social cultural issue, we have our economic issues. In terms of our industry, Brazil has been a very promising country with an interesting and good economic scenario despite the pandemic, and also a environment which has been very promising. What we see is a growth and expansion that are there. The audiovisual sector is one of the areas we want to grow. There are some very interesting aspects that explain that why, on the socioeconomic point of view, Brazil is so strategic for MPA. In terms of the internet, for example, in Brazil, there are around 150 million people who access the internet. We're talking here about 80% of the Brazilian population. These are people that access internet by their cell phones, either the ones with advanced technology or not, but it's 100 million cell phones here in Brazil, roughly half of the Brazilian population. And no wonder individual contents, and here not only entertainment, videos and audiovisual materials are the material which is most consumed when we talked about entertainment and media. Almost 90% of what is consumed via internet in this industry are videos. And here we're talking about people who consume and are using the internet almost 7 hours a day, and this period has doubled during the pandemic. When we talk about investment today, we need to say that the investment on the digital area and the distribution of personal content over the top is what we see our industry growing towards. When I mentioned pandemic, which was a horrible event that we went through, but at the same time stimulated and fostered the consumption of internet content. People were locked in their homes. Everybody needed to take care of their mental health. Nothing better than watching a film or series in order to get away from it all. So pandemic really accelerated all these business models geared towards the digital model. But of course, broadcast TV, movie making, and other areas were also important because of this pent-up demand, especially original content. The demand for local content, not only Brazil but worldwide, has risen exponentially as never seen before. And as I usually say, Brazil, for MPA members and also for other international investors, is one of the most strategic markets in the world. As an example, in 2021, Netflix in the past 2 years invested almost 700 million reais, and they are due to double this investment in the next 2 years. Latin America as a whole is #1 priority for studios, as HBO Max, for example, or Disney as Disney Plus. So the portfolio of both studios contemplate Brazil. For this year and the next 2 years, almost 100 Brazilian local productions. And to answer your question, this is the answer. Why Brazil is so strategic? I believe I just gave you the answer. It will continue to be a very strategic country. I want to elaborate more on that. There are challenges that need to be overcome. I believe this is it. Well, thank you, Andressa. I had another question. I don't know if you want to complement. In terms of MPA, how can Brazil attract international investments for local audiovisual content? So this is exactly what I was going to say next. Here I'm going to give you an overview of MPA as a whole. Here we're not talking only about the market, consumers, and everyone who struggles to be part of it. We're talking specifically about the efforts federal, state, and municipal governments make to see our industry as a very strategic one, not only on the social, cultural point of view, as well as the economic viewpoint. What do we lack? What must be done? When we see the studies and we look everywhere, regions, countries, when we see that there's a specific industry became strategic for the state, what we see is that there was a lot of investment made, either local or foreign investments, or even government investment in the three levels, municipal, state, and federal. And here, a side comment. I want just to highlight the role that Spcine has established in doing public policies geared at our sector. It is an example and a reference of something that has been very fruitful in our country. And here I'm not talking only about financial investment, but above all, a institutional acknowledgement. The government must say, what is our culture? How has our culture been treated throughout the years? The creative economy and culture are above any other sector. No other economic industry is so relevant and has such a multiplying and aggregation effect as our sector. I'm talking about public, financial, and institutional investment, because this is what happens in other countries. Our audiovisual sector has been widely recognized and still is. We usually say that we call it a virtuous cycle of investment and training. When society, private sector, and government are compromised, it is obvious to see more foreign investments. They are attracted more and more. What does this virtual cycle entails? More production, job production, creative development, project development, a stimulus to commercialization, either local or international level of our content. It is qualification and investment virtuous circle. We can also sum it up in one single question, which is investment. What can states do in order to protect our sector, not only in terms of production, but the sector as a whole? We have from technicians that are essential to produce, we have creators, producers, distributors. We have an enormous value chain that needs to be looked at, especially by the state as a whole, in a holistic way, and by means of investment. This will certainly be the most effective way of doing. Investment in what? The question is, first of all, professional training, and specifically in recovery post-pandemic. That's what our industry needs. Fiscal incentives to acquire equipment, which is also very important. The establishment of production hubs, lines of financing for infrastructure, like Steve said. Not only studies, but we have to also think about logistics. It is important to think in a systemic and holistic way, not only put up a audiovisual system, but there is a lot of people before and during this process. But at the same time, what have we seen? And I believe that you are all aware of this. Instead of just having a discourse and the political will to be directed towards investment, I have taken part in debates that focus mostly on regulatory issues. What needs or does not need to be regulated, what is the measure of this regulation to correct whatever problem there is. We're talking here about different regulatory issues. What I usually say is that investment and regulation are not opposite concepts. I understand they are complementary activities. They need to be balanced out nonetheless. I always tell Steve, and I give him an example of two countries in Latin America, Colombia and South Korea. We have seen the phenomenon, which is South Korea. What South Korea has done together with the civil or private sector to produce a boom in this sector, audiovisual industry. This is unprecedented in the world, and I insist on that. Okay, we're going to have regulatory debates, but we cannot forget that regulations and mandatory issues will not have our industry sustainable throughout time and will not make it grow. We need to think about new lines of investment that are focused on the audiovisual value chain as a whole. Without the state and without the private sector efforts, this will not be carried out.
I'm not saying just to say this. This is not the point of view of international or American studios. And these are studies that have been done to show what are the effects of a protectionist policy exclusive in this places that there is regulation. What are the effects of a policy that is protectionist in production and export of audiovisual content? There's a study that has been made by Professor Stephen Cox, which is a specialist in the audiovisual sector in Latin America. He says that protectionist measures are valid, measures that ensure the valuation, the validity of are valid, but they cannot come alone. The state itself, together with the private sector, have to think in other policies, incentive policies, such as cash rebate. And here, once again, I talk about Spcine, that today now Refilm is also investing not too much, but Spcine is here. It's the only film commission in our country and the most well-known that has, together with the municipality of São Paulo, with all his partners, has corroborated more the importance of one of these incentive policies. That can be a cash rebate or tax credit, as Steve mentioned. But once again, what does Stephen Cox said? Cash rebate, measures that value the dissemination of the local culture. Measures that potentialize the distribution of audiovisual content, be it locally or internationally. Fostering policies or investment policies And I would say that when you only looked at the regulatory and protectionism, the export of audiovisual decreases 6 to 7%. The production of the audiovisual content, let's say Bolivia, Colombia, that has 200 in a country that 0.25 or 0.26 per 100,000 inhabitants. I think this answered in a biased way, less in biased way, but what is the political will and institutional will that has to come forward? And here I reinforce on the state and on the side of the state, the investments have to be made in our country. And just to wrap up, we were talking before, that countries that the governments put the audiovisual as a strategic means to have cash rebate or tax credit are the countries that invest most. They invest in Brazil. We all look at the local content and the one that we see, but we're still lacking. And we're here, MPA is here for this, so that our industry continues to grow and turns into the 5th in the world in some views. Thank you, Andressa. Very good. It's very important, this point of view of motion pictures, since it represents all the large Hollywood studios, and some of them that are not specifically from Hollywood. Now going to Edison, the first question. With the experience of who worked for the sectorial industry in Rio Filme, and also with the view of the market from the point of view of a private company, in which aspects how can Spcine can make a difference in the solution of challenges of the structure of the industry? I'm going to try not to be repetitive. I agree with Andressa. What we have not long ago, we had the pay TV that increased the demand for productions due to a regulatory policy. And in this occasion, we had the challenges that we still have, the lack of workforce and infrastructure. What we have today is also a moment of demand due to the lack of regulation and also of international platforms collaborating here in Brazil, and the pandemic accelerated this. 10 years ago, we had the investment model or the support model doesn't have regulation. In both cases, we have the lack of workforce, and we have to preserve the people that are under our contracts so that they continue working with us. We run the risk of losing them next week. We have to talk about equipment. Sibeli is going to talk about this. So the burdens are similar as they go through. Spcine has been an example in this sense, so that they don't hold back the entrepreneurial aspects when a boutique or a producer needs. They have to solve the problem of their project that has to be released, and not the problem of the industry. So many times they don't go through the functioning of each of the producers to the industry. An organ, an entity like Spcine is very helpful, and they communicate the value of our activity for our population, for our countries and abroad. Beyond the policies that include companies and in the sense of consumption. But they should do this for the audiovisual industry. What is lacking is we have to take care of people. Taking care of people was a slogan that was used in Rio de Janeiro, and it was a disaster. The film was is being rebuilt, and the city can't even imagine. But this means that we have to understand which are the CPFs that contribute to the audiovisual activity. Back then, when we had a cycle of the audiovisual industry fund, many of them became companies. Many producers became companies. A photographer became a company to be able to access these funds. The same for a director, a technician, a screenwriter. So we had an increase of companies to access public resources so that they could be able to work. And this is a reality that exists still today. And the pandemic showed that this doesn't resist in the long run. As we know, the city of São Paulo, the professionals that work here, the ones that work in the series of Gustavo are known by Spcine. He's concerned. He doesn't want to lose his professionals. The professional as a company is interested in his work next month, so he wants to see where they're going to pay more, and there's no because he may run out of a job. He has to be visible. If he's not visible through a public entity, he's going to search his next job with any loyalty. When we talk about loyalty, we can talk about private citizens and companies. We have the most creative professionals on the planet in all the areas. So to use another example, in the animation industry, we have millions of professionals working at home, serving Brazilian productions, but being hired by international producers. As we work at homes, they are able to do this. Another example, what benefits can we bring so that this person is able to work constantly and works here and not go abroad to find work? The equipments can not be only for these people. A public entity cannot be an intermediary or a company. When we go to the United States, you buy an Apple computer with a discount for a student. A public entity is able to work with the Spcine that has such a policy as this to attend the companies. And the problem with the entrepreneurs, the businessmen and the producers, and the companies will stand on their own feet if they have the structure. The private citizens that became companies, it's not a logic of micro entrepreneurship. And at the same time, we need cameras, cameraman, third assistants. We need electricians. We need catering. We need drivers. So the city of São Paulo would have to map the individuals that would like to be a part of this, and this database would be a great instrument for them to be inserted and to move the economy as well. Perfect. Now let's touch on the international aspect. Other than cash rebate, how do you believe that a city such as São Paulo can be inserted ever more in the audiovisual international business? I think this is something that is lacking, the executive training. This is a city aimed towards business. When we think about this, we think about events. This is the city of events. So let us make an event that can compete, that will rival the UTC, for example. This is not what I'm talking about. The training of executives, because the role that they have today in all the companies and all my peers is done by people like me, white male, that have universities and have been working in the entertainment industry. We have affirmative actions in the below the line, the inclusion of screenwriters, but there is a lack of people to fill in these places. So this place, the narrator, the creator, or the technician that is inserted there is very important. But this creativity is important when doing business. The solutions that Brazilians have for business are much more interesting than the contract models that we see. And this is disruptive. And we don't identify in the potential audience of the city of São Paulo thousands or millions that could be working in the audiovisual industry. I was able to start lecturing this year. I know that Brazilians love television, and they love to criticize television. They know television, they know the programs, they understand the movements of such person went to another broadcasting company, so they are television people. They're interested in participating from top to bottom, extremely. Now Netflix, they know the shares have fallen. They're experts. We have millions of people wanting to be independent when they negotiate their projects. This is the place to do this. I think the best thing that I found is Spcine space. We don't need an event here in São Paulo. They need a training program that would include this part of the program. Very well. This is very interesting because it's not the focus of the studies below. It doesn't seem that it's not linked to attracting international productions and investments. I think it's directly linked to this. Yes, okay. Now let us go through to Gustavo, to boutique films. First question, Gustavo. For boutique films, how does cash rebate in the city of São Paulo favors the closing of new contracts in the international market? Well, I'm going back in this question because our view is a creative. We firmly believe that the ability of fiscal production, but this is in a connection industry done by human beings for mass entertainment. This is what guides our business, and is what we believe, that to attract international investments, we have to be an industry with the capacity of creating success, and there's a lot involved behind this. But this is what moves us as a company. We in 2016 we closed the first series in Brazil, streaming series in Brazil, and when the first season came in, we were impacted knowing the figures that we achieved We achieved a huge audience in the United States, Italy, Spain, Korea, South Korea, and a series that was Brazilian spoken. We didn't believe in the Brazilian spoken series, and through a new technology, through a new business model, we broke this barrier, and everyone that closed businesses knew that it was difficult to close this kind of deal. And this made us think and believe that the stories would be good. These markets, we had many decades of experience, very mature and solid in Israel, France, South Korea. And on top of this, we began to work with this strategic mindset. In this beginning of 2016, with the streaming that was extremely important to foster our company, we decided to work only with paid TV, and it was essential, that historic moment for our industry. And then in 2016, we began with streaming together with all the industry in this sequence. Then the pandemic comes in, and we saw that this accelerated the process of development for new series, and we saw in practice what had been said, that the investments began to increase from the competition, especially Netflix and some platforms that were already in our radar, from all producers and boutique and everyone. And we saw that in practice, the business plan of everyone was accelerated, and from then on we saw that we needed to prepare ourselves as a company to be able to follow this. So in this historic moment that we are following, we are recovering, and since last year we had several productions of this kind, and now we are going ahead and passing through this critical moment. And with the quota laws, we are in a different level in terms of performance of the series, audience, and I think our level of response and responsiveness as producers and institutions and public policies, we have to answer to this. And at the same time that we have this dilemma, we have an outflow as of the public policies exactly when we needed it the most. And the independent producer, as we see in several markets, to have a strong producers is, I think, there are a variety of business models, of kinds of models that are key, and when this happens, that you see that the industry is healthy. And when we see that we are beginning a new journey now that the pandemic is almost over, a great part of the productions are still going to be released. These are long cycles that to develop the screenwriting for soap operas, and we're talking about 3 to 4 years sometimes. This is a long process that we are still going to see the result of this investment, and the executives, we listen and we look at the return on investment on the long term, how they can measure the results and the high investments that they're making in original series. And we felt what the inflation was for us, It's a very challenging moment in this sense, and the investments have to increase because the international series, we are competing in equal terms. And the ambitions of distribution, not only local but worldwide, are the same. As the 3% had a good performance worldwide. And this turned into a very good movement to have a Spanish series that had a performance even better. And now we have round 6 with a budget of $24 million, returned Netflix to a market value of $4 billion, almost $1 billion. So this could add value to the platforms, and we are in the biggest world game in the entertainment business, and for the first time in history we have a role as an independent producer in this international market as we never had. So I think within this context we have mechanisms such as the cash rebate from Spcine. It replaces the business model that we have. So it helps us as independent producers to have money available, and we have to diversify our business model to be strong producers, to have other models. I think there's a very emblematic state
which had the series in the first season that was made for television, in which managers were also producers, and Netflix spent 70 million reais, and producers saw that the series was able to have a rebate at HBO, Amazon, and Apple TV. It doesn't mean that Netflix invests, but others also invest in foreign markets, almost 250 million euros, a market that gives a good return. And even so, we have 70% return in terms of propriety and share and the profits. I believe this brings this possibility for us. We had a lot in the past, but now the context is different. The context dialogues better in the private sector. It dialogues without being something apart as it was in the past. I believe this is a sort of a modern mechanism that is part of the current business model that helps us to diversify. Within this context, we have been now, we worked in a series 3 years ago, bringing international partners, and this series was spoken in Portuguese. But even so, we were able to bring several partners for investing in Brazil. It was a very clear high concept of what is exportable. We saw that we needed a final sum to close our deal. And for the first time, I was looking at other people's market to decide whether to go to other countries or not. For example, Uruguay would be an artistic challenge, and there are lots of different productions. So, different kind of structures are needed to have a fine production. When it was announced, cash debate was announced here, I said, well, this is going to be it. The series is a solid series. We brought the production here to Brazil. We just signed a contract this week. I'm very happy. We're going to announce our partners very soon. This is a very emblematic point to us. This can inspire other international agents to have different investment in Brazil so that, again, we are a place that not only have a creativity and talents which is native to Brazil. Steve, I'd like to compliment what you said, specifically about cash rebate. What Gustavo said is fundamental. Of course, when you have money, you are able to change the generation of business, especially when we do not have a policy in terms of retaining property from the ones who create and produce these projects. Second, showing the city on the screen is a classic cash rebate programming. But there's something additional. For me, it doesn't seem that innovating makes sense if there is no continuity of ongoing policies. When I was at Rio Film, I was a colleague of Steve's. Our work was to stimulate the private sector to stay in Rio de Janeiro, to bring the best projects to Rio, and to use public money to leverage private sector. I don't know what will happen the next year. How can I take the right decision if next year I do not know if these policies are going to remain? And the cycle of business development are longer and longer. Projects demand more resources. That means more time for negotiation and more partnerships. The one thing that I'm sure that Spcine wants to see is the continuity of programs. This is fundamental. And also to know things. The faster and the earlier we know we have this information, we have conditions to have more partners in, especially international partners. Thank you. This is a very important point for investments and also international productions. Now let's give the floor to Cibele. It is important to see the point of view of equipment provider for the industry. Cibele, I would like to ask you this. What are the main challenges of serving the ongoing demand for infrastructure and equipment in Brazil during this current boom that Brazil is experiencing? Well, I believe that it all began back then in 2017 when we first had the demand for technology. I believe that today the major problem is currency because we buy everything in US dollars. If we want to improve our conditions to meet all the demand that is coming, we have to see these two challenges. Also, technical qualification. This sometimes hampers the use of this equipment for longer. Also, qualification and training. This is something that we need to have urgently. All this will help us organize this technical structure, which now is lacking of good professionals, and also taxation, of course. Today, we have, I would say, abusive taxes for producers or production companies that buy one piece of equipment. They're actually buying the equivalent of two. It's a matter of survival, I would say. But nonetheless, we try to adjust this internally in order not to lose in what we believe, which is quality and this specialized technical service. Today, with the demand we have, we understood that the same problems freelancers have also our employees experience. We had employees since the beginning of Electrica, and we lost this technical assessment. With this change, we were forced to create technical training courses to provide capacity building for these people in the light of the new equipment that was acquired. By doing this, I was able to access associations in a better way and help somehow the same technicians so that they would have access to these pieces of equipment in order to do the technical training. But as a private company, I cannot become a technical center of training and qualification in view of the demand, the ever-growing demand. Today, we have two levels. First, the qualification of those professionals to have the experience that we have, and we do have wonderful technicians, and also include these new professionals that come from the technology world. We had, in the past, we had people who would just press a button to do things, and today we have transmission antennas and a whole set which is led by a single iPad. I believe that today the really big challenge is to find those training courses. Sometimes we want to recycle our staff, and we need to go after this specific training, this technical knowledge. What we have today is kind of obsolete in my understanding. I believe by doing partnerships with big schools in the industry, and by mentioning the schools, I'm thinking about CNAE, which is a vocational and technical school. It is very important to leave this aspect to specific vocational schools to provide this kind of training. It is crucial to have a basic technical training, at least. I believe this exists today, but it's out of date, I would say. We need to bring it back and improve it. I am always willing to leave my company open so that many people have access to this kind of training. Of course, we do not have a person available to clarify all questions that people may have. We need to train somebody to be able to use these machines. We had several experiences that led to having some idle machines because of lack of technical people. Investing in education is fundamental today. It is the utmost question today. It's just like doing things the way they should be done. I believe that we do not have a number of people who are able to provide this kind of training. Today, we, as a private sector, are open and willing to help those who want to learn a little bit of our day-to-day experience. Okay, thank you very much, Cibele. We can talk about specific bottlenecks, but I want to now answer some of the audience's question. First of all, there is one question for Andressa. How does the audiovisual industry can positively impact the collective imagination of the city of São Paulo abroad? Let me see if I got this question right. And so how could this impact the image of São Paulo abroad, the audiovisual sector? How can it impact? Well, what we see today was a boom for local production, and this does not come randomly. Why are production companies are willing to have platforms able to distribute? What we see today is the easiness and the fastness that these works travel abroad. My colleague mentioned the 3%. We can talk about other original productions that were wonderful in terms of disseminating Brazilian cultural values. We're showing not only settings of São Paulo, our environment, our landscape, but also the way we talk, the way we dress. In other words, our cultural diversity as a whole. What does it change? People know Brazil. People will get to see a little bit of Brazil, and this will spark this will to visit Brazil. It's wonderful to know that people all over the world are consuming that work. 3% were among top 10 series, not including English series. Well, people are getting to know how we dress, how we speak, and everything related to our collective imagination. It's important that people know our culture and also our identity as a country, not only regarding São Paulo, but again, I say that Spcine is outstanding as a company that is providing this really important cash rebate. And as Steve said, it is important to have a nationwide program and not only pertaining municipalities and states. Our settings and our locations should be seen all over the world. If I understood correctly, this was the question. Oh, just to add something, I have a concrete experience I wanted to share. There was one North American producer in Brazil, and Carol took him sightseeing around the city of São Paulo. And he began by knowing the city. I'm going to show you places that are they're off the beaten path. He is a Latin producer who lives in Miami, but does not know São Paulo very well. And he was just, he was in awe of what he saw here. Our responsibility as a production company, as authors, we need to represent the diversity of the city of São Paulo to show other places. By doing this, we will increase or expand the collective imagination of people living abroad. They're showing not only native white Brazilians, but also indigenous people, black people, and all our diverse culture. I believe this is something we should be responsible for. In the beginning of my speech, I said, Brazil is really interesting because we have a world within this country. And when you think about microcosmos, we think straightly about São Paulo. The cultural and identity reality of São Paulo is really impressive. What is happening today stimulates the possibility that people come and visit the city of São Paulo, something that was not part of their collective imagination. And here a question to Gustavo and Edison. When it comes to production companies, if one of the challenges is labor, how do you as a company can change or collaborate with this environment? Are there training projects in your routine? And this has to do with what Cibele just mentioned.
Yes, we have to have it. We lack people. If we train, if we have this volume and no training program, the flight attendant is going to have to fly the plane. So we have to keep our crew, our people. We have people that could leave a project, go to another project, but formally, no. If each company has this way of leading with people and its interest of keeping their personnel satisfied and pleased, but this doesn't mean that how Cibele does a training program that is internal to them. The producer that exists for 20 years and that develops people instead of having equipment or having money held in infrastructure. They invest in people. So this is a training that is private. If you look at 90% of the producers, this is the way they work. Perhaps others work in advertisement and have more diverse. Perhaps they need training in terms of programs. But the knowledge that they have in these companies, they can be used. And they have partnerships with Spcine, for example, and there's a great interest in knowledge transfer. From our side, we announced a new structure of the company in which we have an operation that is run by leadership. And today we have the human resources team, and we believe that this is a foundation to begin the training that we have to have. And this is a work in progress. It's beginning now, but it's a long-term project. And we have the leadership involved. We have the identification of talents that has been working very well. Otherwise, we work with projects of qualification return for each professional that works with us, and from the CNAE is an inclusion that is going to be mapped throughout the productions. This is all a basis, but we are not an institution that does this formally. We don't have this training, as has been mentioned. So I think we have to associate ourselves to know what the public entities or private companies that can give us support. We have a good mapping of professionals and their potential, where they can improve, if we connect this through good training, we will have much to gain. Cibele? Yes, I just want to add to this because I think this training appeared through necessity. It was very enriching for us to be able to look at a world in which we didn't have any experience. So looking for those who have this condition, we ended up learning and betting at that moment to be able to fill in this gap. Okay, so I have a question for whoever wants to answer. The gaming sector, the gaming industry, has a power of private investment which is capitalized for international publishers in 2022. What synergies do you observe between these two universes that more and more share players and professionals? How can audiovisual use this gaming sector to attract investments? I can't answer this because this is I have strictly audiovisual, but we are going to start on gaming, but not now because I can't answer this now. But I think the key is international property. That's where the synergy lies. As Netflix, to survive and expand, is heavily investing in electronic games. But what concerns us here is to understand that each person that sits at their computer and works for the gaming industry, for Aquides and another one that I forgot the name, they are working to generate income out of Brazil and not inside Brazil. They can be working for Canada, and they could be working here in Brazil and attract revenue to Brazil if we consider this. So in the gaming industry, we have several developers worldwide, and they are migrating to the gaming industry, many of them, because it's more dynamic, it pays better, and secondly, they are going to international contractors. The debate is always around intellectual property. Why is this gaming industry becoming more and more stronger? Here in Brazil is an example. You said something very interesting. There's no regulation for the gaming industry, which makes not only the issue of intellectual property and international investments are hired by the big publishers. The fact that this being happen, I attribute this to the lack of regulation. If we talk about regulation, that the intellectual property belongs to X, Y, and Z company, if we think about a scenario or a political will to have less regulation and more fostering or more investments, the industry will grow. So this is what I attribute to the low income of Brazil gaming. We talk about qualification for professionals below the line, but the training of professionals is only completed with experience on the filming set. Don't you think that besides training, we would have to have a program of stages and the facilitation of newcomers into the industry? Is there any incentive for this to happen, and what do we need for this to happen? Well, I think this is a theme that interests us a lot. When we map talent, we look at people in the higher, medium, and lower positions, and for each of them we have to have specific policies. When we talk about interns, for example, that are beginning their career in the industry, we have to have programs specifically for this, in partnership with Netflix, in partnership with the Institute, in which we had investments in these professionals, and it's very impressive to see how people grow in their careers and become even heads of department. So I think this is essential, and the question is very pertinent. It's not only talking about technical qualification, but also the experience on set is essential for the professional. So the newcomers, the ones that are assistants, for example, will become heads of sets, but I think this needs a more pertinent mapping of those people that are working with us and doing something active, being active on this. We have to have a serious mapping of who these talents are to be able to see the professionals that work with us and to know where they can, what level they can reach, and we have to look carefully and clarity of communication for these professionals. Anyone else? Yes, I would like to say that first of all, we have to have humane treatment of all these people, because sometimes they don't even know where to start searching for this. Particularly, I think that the trainees, since we have a very technical kind of service, it's very difficult for me to search for other programs, incentive programs. So I prioritized CNAE. They have courses specific for electricity and also for audiovisual. I think this course was the main point or the focus point for the technical training. We are talking about a series of technical qualities or technical knowledge that can come to be with training and specialization. In the case of Mushat, is very close to boutique. We have newcomers and interns, and there is a progression in their career. So we must understand what we do with this person when the production ends, because the professional that is already in the industry can find other jobs. He's going to call another producer, and there is no lack of work for those who are inserted in the workplace. For the newcomers, we have to humanize this process. So if we invested, it gave opportunity to that person, and he also dedicated himself to learning audiovisual, about the audiovisual industry. So what will become of this person that just entered the industry? I think we can have incentives from the private sector, but also from the government as well. Okay, before I close, I have a final question for the panelists. We deal with several producers worldwide, not only United States, Europe, studios, independent producers, and we know that the decision of where to produce depends on several factors. It can be cash rebate, can be tax incentives, it can be the script, it can be specific places or trained specialists. The question for you is, in a scale from 1 to 10, what would be the importance of the cash rebate, of this incentive, for the decision of where to, according to your experience, for the international producers that you have contact? Once again, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would be the importance of the incentive in the decision according to your experience? Let's begin with Edison. I think the answer is going to be different from each of us, but for each specific company, the company I represent, I can't give you a number, but I can say that cash rebate was decisive to solve a financial architecture for a specific project that was made for cash rebate, which is to present the city of São Paulo on the screens. And this is going to grow as we have predictability of this program. Then the boutique case is a little bit different, for having a volume of resources in which you begin the talks about investments with the premise that you have cash rebate. So you're going to negotiate with other bases. And in the case of Moonshot, you have a international company associated to MPA, and we're very happy to use and to have this incentive available for us to understand that we were financially structured, as we have seen with the pandemics raising costs. But I think this is going to grow as we have a planning, knowing that every year we have a cash rebate mechanism to access international markets. But you were able to run away from the questions. You wanted a figure, I gave you a text. No, give me a grade, a number. I'm not going to say 10 because I think we still have room to improve. So I would say 8. Adressa. The importance of having cash rebate is 10. In your specific case, I think I can improve my grade as time goes by. I think not only the importance of having and doing this in a continuously, I said at the beginning of my speech that we are the largest investors in local content here in Brazil, and this is the same in other parts of the world. But certainly our largest investments go to national or regional or local that have programs for tax credit or cash rebate. This is not because we want to, we think it's efficient or not. There are several studies, including the studies developed by Olsberg, but also from other institutions, that show the magnitude and the importance, cultural, social, and economic, of a cash rebate program. I love to mention one data that is on the 2021 study of Olsberg. The value that comes to production and the international investments that comes to a production, from this value, 67% will be spent in other areas of the economy instead of only the audiovisual. So 67% for other industries. And what other action has a multiplying effect as this one? There isn't. So grade 10, grade 1000. So we have to continue with this, either influencing, multiplying, facilitating. Grade 10, grade 1000, congratulations for this program. And once again, my dream is that we can have this in a national level in all other states and municipalities.
As a private company, we never taken part in these kind of support. And my grade is 10. Gustavo? Well, my case is easier than the others because I had a determining factor. My grade is 10. If we look ahead, we see that it was all possible throughout a collective work. We want to have series to be filmed in Brazil, and this has to do with the physical production and creative aspects associated to the possibility of doing it here. So I believe this is a determining factor to close other deals, taking into account that we are an agent responsible to carry this out and be effective in what we do. Well, in conclusion, incentives are determining. Well, again, I want to thank each and every one of our panel members and to thank Spcine for this new value of this incentive. Well, just a little thing about crash rebate. Not long a time ago, somebody said that what happened, the state in its economic recovery, is that it has a robust program of cash rebate. So thank you so much.